All right, so can anyone hear me? All right, that's good. Hello, everybody. We're just 15 minutes before everything starts right now, but as I said, my name is Joshua Haptold, also known as the Lens of Yashu, and you're now going to be watching the Family slash Mothers Against Gun Violence and Street Politics thing. I actually did like uh, a little like promo video for it like a while back, like several days ago, but I made it unlisted. I didn't really like prepare for it in that sense too, like on the promo video, but in that sense too, I could explain what this project's all about before everything starts. So for this, it's this idea that I've been working on for a very long time, which was inspired by the Drea O Show. So Drea O, who is a journalist and content creator from Chicago, who she works for Complex and has implemented like a roundtable discussion on her platform where she interviewed the mothers of Chicago drill rappers and the youth who've died from gun violence in like their city. So uh Sharonda Wallace, or I think Sharonda. So she's the mother of the person named um Tuka. So she was also there, and also like Lasheena Weekly. She was the mother of Chicago rapper FBG Duck. She also spoke about the effects of gun violence and how it has affected her in that interview, and like even like in another interview by like VladTV in that sense. So they discussed how other youth and young adults make fun of the deceased sons or daughters if the daughters have passed away from gun violence, in reference to smoking on them, like relating it to smoking on cannabis. So in some examples, they'll say something like smoking on Tuco. It affect and how like it affects their like legacy of how they want to be portrayed as, not just what they've seen on these vile aspects of social media, but like more positive realms and positive examples in that sense. So this roundtable, I'm following up with that with the same idea, but providing a discussion by having a roundtable by having the roundtable discussion with the various mothers that will be on this platform. So they will come later on tonight. So it's like the mothers of various men or like young men from the GTA or the Greater Toronto area who have died from gun violence in that sense too, but to discuss the harms of gun violence, the effects it has on the family and the role of the family, like how street politics is like a problem within the city of Toronto and other parts of the GTA, and a call to demand a peace and truce to the end of violence and politics. I'm actually reading from my notes, just to not get like backtracked in that sense too. So, so for me, like, how did I know about this, and how did I know about the situation, and why I wanted to take part in doing something like this? So I've noticed the recent gun violence deaths on the streets of Toronto and politics that have been rampant in destroying, the cycle of families, communities, and ways of peace since 2018. And 2018 was probably one of the hardest times within the city of Toronto due to the increasing amounts of gun violence and everything else that has happened from that time too. And I feel that, establishing a truce should be made properly, but the role of the family has been ignored for a very long time in terms of the generation, in terms of the cycle of generation to generation being passed down from family traditions and legacies, the sense of allowing like the sons, speaking out to take over and provide for the family once, certain family members pass away, like that would cease to an end if that person has, if the specific son or daughter has died from gun violence in that sense too. I do feel that society and like mainstream media tend to ignore the responses that truly matter. The parents or siblings that have either like lost their son, like in the video, or like daughters or anyone else involved, like in retrospect, to gun violence or stabbings, and the mainstream media tends to ignore the responses when the families have lost their child for like more than over a year. So you don't really hear from them on what has happened unless certain things do tend to happen. They only occur when it happens when they die at that specific time. So like if that person has passed away within the first 48 or the first 24 hours, they'll get a response quickly. But we're not talking about this like year end, year long, and like how it has been a problem. We don't look at the thoughts or on this or how it has affected them in like a long time, and how like these mothers or these people like involved want the violence in politics to end, and if peace is essential. So having this roundtable discussion that I'm doing tonight, so, and by giving the people, the panelists, like a voice to speak forth on how they feel and how they want their sons to be portrayed as, it might make a sense of a truce that could happen, or a sense of peace if possible. It really doesn't matter if that person who has passed away was involved in any misdeeds or any forms of street violence or street activity. That doesn't really matter, no person should ever like lose their life and leave their family behind regardless. And I do feel that many mainstream and indie-based Toronto media platforms, I don't want to say any names, but if they don't showcase the type of content it would not care to do this. They could either just like drop some interview commentary that sensationalizes the violence and politics that Toronto is facing, and it's tough. And hopefully we could start fresh in that sense too. Like I appreciate the other media platforms that are doing something like this matter too, following path onto path on what we could do to mitigate gun violence, to mitigate street politics, street violence in that sense too. And I appreciate it. And for everyone out here that's watching, that wants to be informed on the issue, that wants to know about the perspectives, the different sides, everything like that, I encourage you to watch it as well and to enjoy it regardless. Or well, I wouldn't well enjoy it in the sense of, I feel like I've learned something. I feel like I can understand how this person is feeling in that sense too. Like I really know that like you don't have to relate, but you could understand in that sense too. And hopefully we're trying to make this into a positive route. So hopefully within the positive route, it'll all work out in that sense. And we're back. So just let me get this started. Hey, Brenda, how are you doing today?
I'm all right. How are you?
Doing all right.
Good to meet
Just
you.
waiting for the others to come by, and hopefully we could start this. So I guess your day so far has been pretty good so far.
Yeah. I just had a drumming gig, so that was a lot of fun.
That's good. That's good. Just gonna check something for a bit just to make sure if everyone will arrive.
Oops. Just going to grab a drink.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, you could. All right. Hey, Denise, how are you doing today?
Hi, good, thank you.
It's good. Just waiting on one more right now. So Brenda has also arrived as well, and Evelyn's here right now. So I'm just gonna add all of you together. Hey, Evelyn, how are you?
Hi, I'm fine. Sorry, I'm late. Good evening.
No worries, no
Morning.
worries. Yeah, I think we have everyone here. So right now it's live on YouTube, so the streaming's like already there. But I'm also gonna press record for everyone that will also come by. So I'm just trying to make sure if everyone's all set.
Okay, give
I
me
guess
2 minutes.
we're all set right now.
Okay, give me 2 minutes. I'll be right back.
Yeah, no worries. How's your day so far, Denise?
It's not too bad.
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty sunny outside, pretty warm weather right now for Toronto, which it's all good, pretty much.
Okay. Whoop. Sorry about that.
Uh, all right. So usually for this, I'm just gonna start off the introduction and then the land acknowledgement if everyone's all good from there.
Okay.
All right. So I'm just gonna press the recording in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right. So let me start it off. Hello, everyone. My name is Joshua Haptold, also known as the Lens of Yashu, and today you are now watching the Families Against Gun Violence and Street Politics panel, a panel that digs deep into the discussion of gun violence and street politics and how it affects the families of those affected. This panel is more directed towards what's happening in Toronto, but gun violence and street politics is also a worldwide issue. Today, I'm here with three wonderful women who are the mothers of sons that have passed away due to gun violence in the city of Toronto. Joining me as moderator will be Evelyn Fox, the mother of Kissinger Gun, who is also a community activist, anti-gun violence advocate, and founder of Communities for Zero Violence, an advocacy and awareness nonprofit agency that aims to take a holistic approach to connect communities in order to eradicate gun violence while supporting the victims and survivors. I would like to introduce the rest of the panelists in the audience. Joining us for today are Denise Stennett, or Denise Jackson, if you prefer that, who is the mother of Joel Stennett, aka Brampton, Ontario-based rapper Steno, and Juno Award-winning musician and motivational speaker Brenda McIntyre, the mother of son Quinn Taylor. Ladies, how are you doing today?
Good, thank you.
All right.
All right. It's good so far. So I just want to start off with a land acknowledgement for Toronto. So we acknowledge the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. And I guess let's start off. So, ladies, please introduce yourselves to the viewers and tell them more about yourself.
What do you want to start with?
I think let's start with Evelyn first, and then Brenda, and then Denise.
Okay. My name is Evelyn Fox. I am the founder of Communities for Zero Violence. I created the nonprofit in honor of my son Kissinger, who was killed in September 11th, 2016, outside of 42 Supper Club. I am an advocate against community violence, and also for victims' rights and supports. I also provide trauma counseling and group counseling to mothers, siblings, cousins, extended family, anyone who's been impacted by the homicide of their loved one. That's, I guess, all about me.
Hi, Bojo, Mishkikin Gaman Nikwin Gishnikas, go Kokorodam, Hanishnabekwe, and I'm coming to you now from what is formerly known as Deshkan Zibi, London, Ontario, on the traditional lands of the Anishinabek, Haudenosaunee, Lenapewick, and Ottawandaran peoples, on lands connected with the London Township and Sombre Treaties of 1796 and the Dish with One Spoon Covenant Wampum, which also covers Toronto. I'm a Juno Award-winning singer. Quinn was a rap and trap artist and producer, and ever since he passed in 2016, January 31st, my work has completely changed. I run my own business. I help women to find their voice and to embody resilience. That resilience piece has come in strong after losing my son. I also lost my parents as a child, so I have a lot of grief that I've lived through, and this pandemic has proven to be kind of similar, really similar to what I've been through after losing my son. So it's been interesting. Miigwech, thank you.
My name is Denise Stennett. I was the mother to Joelle Stennett, otherwise known as Steno. I lost my son November 30th, 2019. He was 18 years old at the time, and he was my only child. So I'm working through this journey of loss. It's not easy, but I was connected to Evelyn, and I've never thought of myself of being an advocate, although I'm totally aware of the gun violence in the city, and as Josh indicated, the politics surrounding it, especially in the music industry. So, but why not join? Seems like a good cause.
All right. So usually for this, I will start it off counterclockwise within each question. So it will usually start off with Denise first, then Brenda, then Evelyn as well too, and then we'll also get through with questions and everything else too, and other comments as well. So I want to start off with the first question. So where did you guys grow up, or which area did you live in, like the Toronto and Greater Toronto area, and what was the reality / environment like in the area that you grew up?
I was born and raised in Scarborough, far east corner, borderline of Pickering. So growing up, typical residential neighborhood. Back in my time, it was predominantly Caucasian at the time in my neighborhood. There wasn't a lot of Black people. Basically stayed in Scarborough till I was 16, and then I headed out to the West End. I still am to this day.
Is it my turn next?
Yeah, it'll be counterclockwise.
PTSD, so I may not remember some things. Like the question. What was the question? Oh, growing up I didn't grow up in Toronto, actually. I grew up out west in BC and loved it there, but I lost my parents there, and so I moved here. And my son told me one day that Parkdale, when we were living in Parkdale, that was like kind of the beginning of everything bad for his life. So, I mean, I was grateful to move out of Parkdale, but not before my son just really went down not the greatest path for him. He was influenced by a lot of what was going on in that neighborhood, I guess. Yeah, it was not the best neighborhood.
So I grew up in various places around Toronto. A lot of it in Malvern, as well as West Hill area, Galloway area. When I was around 18, I moved to Jane and Finch and was there for a while, for about 11 years. And then I came back to the Galloway area. So, but as a kid, I moved around. It's very different now than what it was when I was a kid. Malvern has like seriously built up since I lived there. There wasn't a lot of like all the mall and everything wasn't there when I was living there. Galloway has built up a lot as well, even since I was like a preteen. Even Jane and Finch, like even though there's still the same monuments there, it still has had like a facelift in the past, I would say 10 to 12 years. But yeah, like it's always had its ups and downs in terms of crime. There's a lot more homelessness across all three areas right now, and visible homelessness, whereas before you would never see homeless around, and if they were, you didn't realize that they were. There was no panhandling or anything, but there's a lot of it now. But yeah, in terms of the actual community violence in the street, there was gangs back then, and there was I wouldn't say like big gangs or anything, but just, circles of friends, and they called themselves whatever, and they, just like regular gangs are now, except maybe just not as organized, I'd want to say. It's just like friends hanging out, whereas I'd say more people are a little bit more organized now in terms of what's going on. But it had up and downs, but not as severe as it is now. Like gun violence back then was rare.
I truly understand. I just want to get to the next question. I think we already like spoke more about that in the area. So for the people that have like lived in Toronto in that sense, so like usually in terms of the area, do you feel that the area that you grew up in, Toronto, or if you've moved to Toronto at a certain point, changed for the better or the worse? Or do you feel that the area is still the same in terms of development and such? We're still going to continue it like counterclockwise from what we have. It's just we have another participant who will ask like later in the interview.
So Denise?
Yeah.
I wouldn't say the neighborhood that I grew up in and where I moved to had an influence on my son's life. I mean, only lived in 3 districts, basically Scarborough, Etobicoke, then Brampton, and back to Etobicoke. I think his exposure was more to the music, wanting to emulate, I guess, a lifestyle that he wasn't a part of. That seemed to be the draw. Going to school, obviously, you have different pockets of people as well. So you meet new friends. Even myself growing up, you meet new friends. Some people.
Denise, you're still here, right? Or has the connection missed?
Yeah, she's frozen.
Visiting different neighborhoods, seeing different things, and I guess one that doesn't live in it as, I don't know how to describe it, maybe exciting, lively, as opposed to being brought up in it every day to see it in a different aspect. So what might be a downfall for somebody, I guess I would assume for my son, it seemed like something excitable. It's new, it's different, it's not the norm. So that's what I would more say. But the music, getting into it basically drew him into a different atmosphere and lifestyle and exposure. And fortunately, music influenced things that he rapped about, company that surrounded him, and so forth. And they say, bad follows you, essentially. So basically what transpired.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
So for what I had for the question was, so in terms of the area that you grew up in Toronto, so I think for you it would be Parkdale by the time that you moved there. Did you feel like that Parkdale has changed for the better or for worse, or do you feel that the area is still the same in terms of development and such?
Well, what I can say is I was living there for 36 years. I just moved like literally just less than 2 weeks ago to London, partly because of this. And I lived in a lot of places in Toronto, and I have seen definitely like major differences. Like, I mean, I'm a singer. I used to love going out dancing and partying and stuff, and there was never any worry about gun violence. Like, not at all. You just go out and dance and go home at 3 a.m. and be fine. And it has totally changed. Like downtown has changed. Like when I first moved to Toronto in 1985, I moved to pretty quickly after I moved to Toronto. I was living downtown at first, then I moved to St. Clair and Vaughan, and that's where I just left. I've been in that area again for another 16 years, and in that time, it has completely changed. I mean, it used to be. For me, anyways, my experience of that area was good. It was vibrant culture, and that still I think is going on. But the gun violence has started to take over. I mean, it crept right into my neighborhood, right onto my street. Like at the end of my street in September last year, there was a shooting. That's never ever happened before in my neighborhood, where I was living, St. Clair West and west of Bathurst, east of Dufferin, and that stuff was never happening there. It's crept down from like Oakwood and Vaughan kind of area. Even those St. Clair and just St. Clair West area, it's gotten really bad. I am shocked, honestly, because when I moved there, it was a lovely little neighborhood, and now that's why I moved. That's really like a lot of why I moved. Yeah. And I would say the same for, I mean, I lived in Scarborough a long time ago. I lived in like Unionville, like Warden and Steeles areas, like lots of different areas. And the ones that I've been back to since living there a long time ago, it's like it's all changed. It's really gotten bad everywhere as far as I've seen.
So in terms of like the Scarborough, like I said, it has its spurts. It goes up and down in spurts. I wouldn't say that it's gotten bad in Scarborough. Jane and Finch, like when I lived in Jane and Finch, I felt safe all the time. I could walk home from the bus stop at 2 and 3 in the morning, and I knew people out on the street. I never had a problem. You know what I mean? Like I loved living there, and I knew all my neighbors. The community was like family. They looked out for my kids. So I really, and there was shootings there, maybe not in the same the same degree there is now. But they, like in 2005, I think, like 2005, 2003 to 2005, it was probably a little bit worse than normal. But overall, I still felt safe in the Jane and Finch community. There was a shooting once down in the lane that this guy Warren, he was shot outside in the parking lot picking up his daughter, and his daughter actually was killed. I think she was like 3 months old, and she got hit by the stray bullet in the backseat of the car and ended up dying. So I mean, like, it has had its issues, and I think that it's kind of escalated a little bit more in terms of like actual targeted shootings, but it also goes up and down as well. Like, it has its times where it's not as bad as the other, but at the same time, like, we have to think about the demographic in itself, right? So you have Jane and Finch, Jane from Steeles and Jane all the way straight down to almost the subway. You have housing project after housing project after housing project after housing project, and it's like all in a strip. Whereas in Scarborough, the housing projects, there's one across Kingston Road and Lawrence, and across on the other side is Galloway, and then you have Danzig down by Morningside, and like they're spaced out. They're not really back to back, right? And same with Malvern. Like, Malvern's housing is spread out as well, so you don't have as much dense social housing and poverty in those areas than comparison to Jane and Finch area. So I think that when you think about the density of poverty, you're going to get more prone to community violence, right? So yeah, but overall in Jane and Finch, I would say that I felt safe living there. I still have friends and stuff that still live there. So I mean, I don't know. I think it's just the way that the communities are made up that they're prone to the violence almost.
I see what you mean right there. I think just getting into the topics that we have involved, right now with the Suns. So just with this question right now, what would be your first memory or your best memory that would come to mind when it comes to your son?
There's so many memories, but
it's hard to pinpoint one.
Yeah. I think one that was really special to me is my son was 9 years old, and it was my birthday, and I woke up to breakfast. He made me pancakes, which because I didn't realize that he knew how to use the stove, but I guess by watching me all the time, he decided that he was going to do something. It took a lot of control not to be upset that, your son or your child is using the stove behind your back, but it was a gesture, and it's one that I've always remember, and it's strange that I actually took a picture of the pancakes and I still have it to this day. So that's one of the special moments is, when he got up and made me breakfast.
I love that. That's so beautiful. For me, honestly, it comes right to mind because my son would sit in my living room, just bouncing and making beats. And then other times when he wasn't expecting me to come home and he had the music cranked all blasting loud and making his own beats. And then I open the door and he's just dancing away in the living room because he doesn't know I'm there. But his passion for music, for that just shone right through, and that was what he did. If he was at my place, that's why he was there. Otherwise, he was out and about doing his thing, and then he would come back and do music. That's it, you know, and that and hanging out with his little girl. Those are the three things.
Thank you for sharing, guys. I have so many memories that it's hard to pinpoint one. Kissinger was like really zestful. Like he really loved living to the fullest, right? So as a kid, he came home from playing outside one day and he was like bleeding and whatever, and I had to take him to go get stitches under his chin. Like he'd gotten stitches under his chin, and I was like, how did you get a cut under your chin? And he said that he was playing football or whatever and then ended up hitting a wall. And I'm like, well, how did you hit a wall and end up with stitches under your chin? It didn't add up, but at the same time, I was like, okay, whatever, you know, at least he's safe and there's no significant damage and whatever. And as he got older, we were sitting around talking, and he was telling us that I think my daughter said, so why don't you tell mommy that about what happened when you got the stitches under your chin? And I was like, what do you mean? And she's like, tell her. And he's like, well, I was running because connection, all the buildings are connected. So you can basically go from one building on the top of the roof to the next building, to the next building, to the next building, right? Until you come to the 40 turf and you have to get down and go back up. And he had been running across the top of the buildings, going from building to building, and then ended up running down by Needle Fairway, which is a tall building, but it has a parking garage that is kind of like low so that the kids can get on it. And he jumped onto the parking garage and then jumped off, and the iron railing that's there, he slammed his chin on the iron railing. And like, I was like, oh my gosh, dude, like what would possess you to do that? But all the kids were doing it. So it was like they would go up there and take the tennis balls, the basketballs, whatever is on there, and then toss them off and then play with them, right? But like he used to do the most random, bizarre stuff just because he thought it was fun. It was hilarious. He was like a thrill seeker. That's more what it was, a thrill seeker. So that anything that could potentially be an accident, he would do it.
I understand, and those are some very great memories that you guys shared. And I'm glad you shared them, because I don't think no one really talks about like great memories about their kid or their son or their daughter, and that really is like an important thing in life, you know, to cherish like the memories regardless in that sense too. Just to get on to the next question. So before the incidents that took place, like what was like, I know that it might be like a triggering question, but what would be the last 24 to 48 hours like with your son? Were there any like decent memories that you could think of? And I know it might be hard to, but like what were those like last words that you said to them, or that they said to you in that sense?
Our last conversation was it was a phone call. He was at his friend's house and called and asked for his SIN number, as he has a hookup for a job. So it was like oh boy, here we go again. Like, he's always looking for a job but doesn't seem to get the job. So it was basically a back and forth. I gave you the SIN number when you were 16. I told you to hold on to it. I don't know where it is. I took a picture of it because I knew this day was going to come where you're going to tell me that you cannot find the SIN number. So it was just back and forth. Well, can you find it? Can you give it to me? And it's like, I don't have it. I gave it to you. And he goes, but I know you have it. And it's like, no, I don't. And I go, do you remember when we went to the mall? I handed you your birth certificate and your health card. And I said, put these up. You need to start walking with the wallet. Like, you need to grow up, start acting like a man, right? You could drop down on the street any day and nobody would know who you are because you don't carry ID. And ironically, that's exactly what happened when he passed. He didn't have ID on him either. So that was our last conversation. And then it was just, where's this job and who's finding it for you? Oh, my friend said this company is hiring. And it's like, I go, everything is always a friend, a friend, a friend, a friend. I go like, can't you show initiative and get up and just look for it yourself? You're always waiting for somebody to hand you something. And it was kind of like a miserable conversation because we always go through the same argument all the time. You got to show initiative. Like, even with myself, I tell him the same thing. I can't keep babying you all the time. You got to learn to take grown-up steps and show that you're getting mature and you can do stuff on your own. I'm always there to help you, but I can't just keep handing stuff to you. So that was basically our conversation, which he doesn't like when I tell him show initiative and do something on your own. So it was weird, a typical back and forth banter attitude. And that was, yeah, unfortunately our last conversation.
Yeah, for me, it was similar, actually. And I can relate to the social insurance number. My son had ADHD. I do too, I think, probably. But so I don't even remember though, because it was like 2 weeks or so before the last time I saw him, because at that point he had found who he was saying was the love of his life, and he was very happy with her, so he was spending a lot of time with her and not at our place. And so like come home maybe for like a quick shower, maybe like do a couple of beats and then out and then go and stay with her. And so it was probably, something like, I feel like we probably had an argument about some whatever, didn't take the garbage out or something. But one fond memory I have that has to do with that is because of his ADHD, I had to always like tell him lots of times to do something. And it was just like getting on after Christmas time. We had the Christmas tree still there. So I had, and I still have on my fridge, even after I moved to London, that had to come with me. This was on a little like magnetic bulletin board thing on the fridge telling Quinn to take down the Christmas tree. Don't forget to take down the Christmas tree. But he did take it down before he left. Yeah. So, yeah.
The last time I physically saw my son and spoke to him was on September 8th, 2016, which is also the last time I saw my one grandchild. He had picked her up, and because on Thursdays was his day to visit with her. So he brought her home and we were sitting down watching TV, watching the news, me, him, and my eldest daughter and the baby. And I guess there was a shooting somewhere, and I looked at him and I'm like, well, you know what, whatever you do in outside there, make sure that you're not getting into any fights or arguments or whatever the case may be, because people don't argue and they don't fight with their fists. They use guns to settle their arguments now, because nobody has the ability to communicate or even duke it out like how they used to. And he's like, Mommy, stop worrying about me. You're always worrying about me. Nothing's gonna happen to me. I'm fine. Stop worrying about me. He's like, I'm big now. I'm grown. You don't have to worry about me anymore. Stop worrying about me. And I said to him, if something ever happened to you, I would die. Like, I can't stop worrying about you. It doesn't matter if you're an adult. I will always worry about you because I love you. And if anything happened to you, I don't know what I would do with myself. And I just kind of like went like this to him in his hair, and I said, you know what, you need a haircut, and gave him a kiss and went upstairs to my room. And then when he was leaving to go bring the baby back, and then go over to his fiance's house, he kind of yelled up the stairs and said, you know, bye, and I love you, and I'll see you on Sunday. And then I saw him on Sunday, but he was on life support. So, and he was in a coma. So I didn't, like, I stayed with him his last 15 hours, but like physically alive and being able to speak to him September 8th.
That's some very interesting aspects right there, and I appreciate you guys for speaking up about like those memories as well too. And even though within the concept it is mainly about the family in that sense too, and I just wanted to just ask, you know, usually within the effects. So by the time that you know your sons have passed away, what were the effects that it had on like the family, like not just like the short-term period, but like the long-term like effects as well?
I don't have a big family to begin with, so the effects were, I know for my mom it was extremely difficult. My son was her favorite grandchild. Although they fought consistently, they had this special bond. It's not something that's spoken about, um, unfortunately, so I can't really say how my immediate family is taking it. I do have a nephew that was the same age as my son, and he's having a hard time. And for me, it's worrying because I see that same, before my son passed, he was depressed. A lot of people didn't know that, but my mother can see the signs. And it's worrying to see my nephew almost in that same dark spot, like just empty. So losing practically the only cousin he was close to, I can see the negative effects that it's having on him. With regards to extended family, my ex-husband's family, their family is taking it very hard. All the cousins on that side are taking it extremely hard. They're quite vocal about it. His friends are taking it extremely hard, and it's hard as a mother to see other young adults struggling, whether they have parental support with regards to the loss, or whether it's just, oh, well, it's just another child or friend. You guys are just teenagers, so it gets brushed off. But it has taken effect on them, and being as young adults, although I call them kids, but they're all ranging from the age of 18 to 25, my son's different friend circles. They've all been very supportive. I knew my son had a humongous impact on many people's lives, like even people that he, like from grade school, that when we moved from one end of the city to the next, like I had people reaching out to me from 8 years ago, 9 years ago, telling me the shock, like the impact that my son left in their life. Like my son was very, very sociable, very friendly, he's funny. Like he was just the life of the party. He was the guy that you always want around. He's the joker, the fun guy, whatever. So, but he's also the helper. He's always encouraging people, always giving people advice. It's strange, he always put more into everybody else except for himself, which was his downfall. But everybody to this day is still having a hard time dealing with it. His girlfriend at the time, I know she's struggling. We talk a lot. I try to give her encouragement. But it's a difficult time for a lot of his friend circle. And I don't, because they're so young, they don't know what to do with their emotions. A lot of them, this is the first death that they've ever encountered. So, and it was so unexpected. So that's how it's being handled on my side. Mostly his friends and my previous extended family are having a hard time dealing with it, adults and the kids. But they still show homage to him. Like a lot of them are on my online accounts and they still post pictures, say how much they miss him. And it's touching to me because for me, I just think like, they're young, they're gonna forget about him or whatever, but it just, although sad, it makes me happy to know that he had such a great influence on people's lives. That even a year and a half in, he's still at the center of their mind and they're still showing their respect to him. So,
Yeah. So beautiful to hear. Yeah. And difficult for me. There was a lot of like family drama because I wasn't really connected to his father's side of the family. His father had been deported to Jamaica, and I had left him a long time ago, and so I was always raising him by myself from when he was 5. But something really amazing for Quinn was that he actually reconnected to that side of his family because he really felt this strong pull, which now we know why. He wanted to reconnect with them, and he did. He found it just magically all happened. And he was able to reconnect with his grandmother on his father's side and his cousins in New York and some other of his family, his other cousins here. And so I'm really happy for him that happened. But yeah, when something like this happens, people don't know what to do. People don't know how to deal with grief because we're not taught how to do that. We're taught how to push it down. We're taught how to move on, get on with it. Why are you taking so long? Like that's just in our society. And so when we when we have something like this kind of a traumatic loss, then everybody is a mess. And communication becomes really difficult for everyone. Because, I mean, for me, I was in shock for a good 3 months. Couldn't really talk to anyone or do anything except for my support people. And, my daughter kind of didn't have me the way that she did. Like, I wasn't really there for her as much as I could have been if if that hadn't happened. So it's like, what do you do? So, I mean, we had to get counseling for both of us. And it was just really hard for all of us. And like because people don't know how to deal with it, I actually lost people in my life. I had a connection with my biological mother, and she basically ditched me as soon as I texted her to let her know. I never heard from her again. I had a friend in California, never heard from him again, and then now there's just no trust there in the relationship. Now that he finally came back and apologized and said he was depressed, and when like I had an uncle that called me and he didn't know what to say or do, and people ask the weirdest questions. Like right at the vigil, someone asking me like, oh, how did it happen? How many bullets? And it's like, excuse me. But people don't know how to react, and so they just react how they react. I'm a healer, so I'm kind of used to that kind of thing happening, and so I just stuck a lot to myself, and me and my daughter just supporting each other side by side, and just being there for each other. and we still are. And that's actually part of why I moved here too to London. Is she moved out of Toronto first, and there were a lot of other reasons that I wanted to move, but you know, two of the main ones were to be closer to my daughter and also to get away from the Toronto gun violence. Really. So I don't know, a lot of issues because I'm Indigenous. My son was Jamaican and Indigenous, and you know we're both also Irish and Scottish. But on his Jamaican side of the family, they didn't understand the spiritual traditions, the cultural traditions that I have. My son hadn't. I mean, whose kid has a will when they're that young? Like for what? So nobody knew what he wanted, and people were just saying what he wanted or what they thought he wanted, and it was just a little crazy. So it was hard. It was hard all along, all around, and it still is. But just because I've surrounded myself with a lot of support, and that is ongoing. Um, and that's the best I can do, and try and have relationships as the best that I can with the people in my life that are still in my life. And one of my son's friends, there's only really three of his friends that kept in touch with me or that even knew me at all, honestly. And one of them, I feel really, the three of them, I feel really happy to be connected with them. But especially this one that I just saw before I left for London. I gave him some of my son's things that I still had that I just felt it would be nice for one of his friends to have. And yeah, I'm grateful for that connection because I know one day when the time is good for both of us that we'll sit down, and we talked about this, that we will sit down and he will share stories with me of his time with Quinn, and that means a lot.
So with me, the first year was difficult. I was like suicidal, having thoughts of revenge, retaliation. I I was in so much shock that I couldn't even cry at my son's funeral. And as the time in the weeks after, like having the last moments play in my head over and over and over was tormenting. Like I literally felt like I was losing my mind. Like I really felt like I couldn't function. Like I was going from one place to another, but I couldn't tell you how I got there. Like I was just going through the motions day to day, but I couldn't tell you half or even majority of the stuff that I was doing because I don't remember. And your ability to even make a sentence is so limited. Your vocabulary, you're just even to try to find the appropriate words to make a sentence was difficult. After the first year, I would say, my family's close. So we kind of stuck together as much as possible to support each other. And we got counseling. But at a certain point in the counseling, it almost felt like it plateaued. So it was good and it did its job for a certain duration. But after that, and I guess because in your down moments is when you need the counseling. But when you have the appointment set, you could be having a rare good day that you feel some sense of joy in it. And then you go to counseling and then it just makes you tank, right? Because you're bringing back all this stuff up that you're trying to kind of suppress or get rid of. And then you end up with an appointment that day that sinks you back in. So that was kind of difficult. After the first year, and like the first year was the same for almost all of my kids too. Like we had ups and downs, constant up and downs. And when I was down, my other kids weren't necessarily down. Whereas, and we all had different moments. We all supported each other in those different moments. And it was it's such a surreal way to live. And then after the first year, when you finally come out of shock, that's when like reality really slaps you in your face. So it's like your brain has a way of protecting you with the shock so that you almost don't feel the reality of it until after the shock wears off. And then I was like so depressed I could barely get out of bed. Like I couldn't think, I thought I would see my son in the streets, and it was horrible. And then I kind of disassociated myself away from everybody just because I didn't want to feel connected to anybody. I didn't want another person that I loved to be harmed or to be killed or whatever. So I kind of distanced myself so that I didn't have to feel pain all over again. And my nephew, who was with my son that night, he couldn't even be around me. Like just being around me used to make him depressed, and he couldn't be around my son's children. Same deal. He felt guilty and he felt upset. And even though he didn't have any guilt placed on him, he shouldn't, because it wasn't his fault and he's not the reason for what happened. He still felt a whole lot of guilt and literally could not be around me or Kissinger's children. And it wasn't until my younger son started really engaging in some serious at-risk behavior and getting arrested that I kind of snapped out. Because I really disassociated. So I didn't just the thought of it would like break me down. That if something happened to somebody else, like it really broke me down. So when my son started engaging in all these at-risk behaviors and stuff, it kind of popped me out of my cocoon almost. And like, I had to be a hardcore advocate for him, and I had to be a hardcore mother for him, because I could really tell that like he was almost having the same thoughts as I was. So I had to kind of intervene and express to him the thoughts and feelings that I'm having, and that he so that he doesn't feel alone. He doesn't have to think that he's the only one that feels that way, and that he's the only one that is mourning Kissinger to that extent. Because when stuff like that happens, you tend to be so engrossed in your own grief that you feel very alone. You think that, you're the only one who's grieving such a significant impact on the person that's lost. And even though he's my child, he was still a father figure and a sibling to his siblings. And like they have a significant age gap. So, and he took care of my younger two kids a lot. So for them, it was like losing a parent and a sibling. So it was, and then you have like his partner, Kissinger's partner was also like doing things she wouldn't normally do and trying to find a way to cope with what was occurring, plus trying to take care of 3 children by herself and having this new way of life on top of her grief. So it kind of really made me have to step up and push my stuff aside to kind of take care of my son's kids and take care of my son's fiance and take care of my other son, so that, you know, something bad didn't end up happening, or trying to intervene and all that. And my son's best friend, his two best friends actually, one of them can't bear to be around me. It just is too much for him. My other son's best friend has been in and out of jail constantly since he's passed away. And so like there's a lot of at-risk behaviors type of thing. And even though I have supported him with getting counseling and that type of stuff, he's still, some people just can't seem to find the appropriate places or outlets to get all that stuff out, or they don't feel comfortable doing it, or they've never, they feel that it's taboo almost for them to engage in, just because they're male as well. Like a lot of males don't tend to see counselors or even seek them in terms of mental health, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder. Like my entire household, except for one person, has post-traumatic stress disorder. So it's been very difficult, and we still have the ups and downs. Like it's 4.5 years later, and we still have the significant ups and downs. Like one day you could be perfectly fine, and then the next day you can't get out of bed, you can't stop crying, and it's at times debilitating. So it's I wish I could say that it gets better, but no. Like the communities for zero violence is almost like my saving grace, because it allowed me to put all of that negative energy that I had into doing something positive, because I was going down in a very, very bad way very, very quickly. So, and it's unfortunate because I can, like when they talk about you know, the kids retaliating, all these youth that are retaliating for lost loved ones and lost friends, I totally understand it. I completely understand the thought process around it, and the like their impulse control, the lack of impulse control, because at any moment you could do something completely out of your character. Like that's how haunting it is for you, and the things going on inside your head are so overwhelming that it's hard to explain. It really is. But I totally understand the thought process behind it, and the total unbearable grief that these young kids feel. Like if I'm a grown woman who has a mature brain and I have those thoughts, what are these youth having to deal with when they're at times using substances and their brain is not fully developed? Depending on how much trauma they have had in their lives, their brains have been impacted by the trauma, which slows down the growth of their brain process. So how can we expect that these kids won't impulsively act on their thoughts if they haven't even been able to process properly through their own trauma that they continually have? Some of these youth have had multiple friends die, multiple family members die. How does one get used to that? Like that's something you cannot get used to. How do you get used to that without having some serious like mental breakdown? It's crazy.
And I appreciate you ladies for sharing all these experiences as well, like on that whole aspect of how it affects the family, like in that sense too. And it's tough, you know, losing someone, and you know, it's even hard to like even think about it as well too. And I know that we've talked about, like how it has affected, the youth in some way too, but and even like within the sense of peace, that there can never be like no justice, no peace unless you have a saving grace like a program. So even as far as like the long-term effects on that, do you feel that nothing has changed since that incident in terms of gun violence in the city of Toronto or even like in Canada? Or were there some changes that were in effect on that in that sense?
You're on
Uh,
mute, Denise.
I don't see that there's been a change. I mean, after my son's death, there's been a few homicides thereafter. A few connected to this ridiculous music politics of, I just sum it up to be jealousy. But nothing much has changed. Like sometimes when I listen to the news and it's like, oh my gosh, like another shooting, like what is really going on? What is the thought process of these kids nowadays? It's almost like, I don't know, like they're living out a video game. Like it's just literally a game. Like there's no feeling behind it, but it's saddening to know that it's almost like they believe that there's no hope. This is the only way. This is the only life that we can live. So it's sad to see that children feel that way. And I'm beginning to realize that it stems from all different walks of life. It's like it's expanding its wings to like encompass even people that are not or do not live in the inner city or grew up in the inner city. It's just, I don't know, kids nowadays seem to find this lifestyle fascinating, but have no thought process to the damage that it does to families until it actually hits home sometimes. But I don't see it's getting better. Like we've had how many shootings in the past couple of days, so the streets are the streets right now. And I would say over the years, from what I've seen, I mean, considering my age, yeah, you hear about homicides all the time, but to me, I think like it's getting worse. And it's even sadder when it involves so many children who haven't even begun to live their life or experience anything. So, yeah, not much improvement, if I can say. It doesn't seem like there is.
Yeah, sadly, I would say the same. Mostly, I know that there's been some initiatives that have begun to happen. I know that Trudeau doesn't know what he's doing. It's not assault rifles; it's illegal handguns coming up from the states. So that's what needs to stop. And you know, there's the roots and even the seed of the problem is which has kind of come out so much during COVID times is systemic racism. You know, it's Black and Indigenous kids mostly that are getting shot and often doing the shooting. And to Evelyn's point, it feels like that's where they get to that point that we moms have gotten to, where it's like, I mean, I was in court one day fantasizing about, oh, all of a sudden I had the plan. Oh, I knew exactly how I could just get him right now. That kind of thinking is kind of messed up. But where does that come from, right? It comes from PTSD. It comes from pain. It comes from shock. It comes from trauma. And it comes from having so much of that you just don't know what to do. And that is so many Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and especially youth. So it's like, and we can give them all the love I was giving, we love our sons. And, you know, it's not like Quinn had a horrible life or anything with me, but it was still, his father was not there. And he still had his moments of like feeling like he doesn't belong. And, and then, you know, looking for that family, which ends up being those, you know, I know he wasn't in a gang, but it's still, he was hanging around with people who were not great for him, influencing his behavior in negative ways. Even when he was as small as like 7 years old, I saw that, and getting bullied and in a lot of pain. But you know, he wasn't the one doing the shooting, but then some people do. Why is that? I don't know. I lost my parents. My brother and I both handled it very differently. Why is that? We're different people. But the laws aren't really, it's not laws that are going to really change anything right now. The systemic racism needs to be dismantled, basically. You know, that's really at the heart of it, at the core of it. Denise was talking about her son trying to find a job. Yeah, my son too. Quinn was always like just trying to like wanting to find a job, wanting to support his little girl, wanting to be able to move out and have a nice place and live with his within. He was going to make a try with, you know, try to make it work with his ex-girlfriend for a while there with his who had his baby. And it's like that whole scenario was just really hard on him because every time he'd get a job, it was in construction or something. And then there's this whole like terrible, I don't know, system of how that works. Where they just basically, as soon as you are about to come into having benefits with the job, they hire somebody else, right? And get rid of you. So it's just another systemic thing that happens. And you know, and then these kids are looking for jobs, and then it's like, well, where's the jobs for these people, for these kids who are gifted in their own ways and skilled in different things? Where are the programs to help them to train and to get, you know, apprenticeships and things like that? There are some of those programs out there. But I remember too, my friend telling me that is a social worker. Oh, I don't know anything about these politics, but through her, I learned a little bit that, you know, it's not like my son maybe not being in a gang, but if the kids that are in gangs or afraid of the gangs in their neighborhoods or whatever aren't going to leave, they can't leave. So if there's programs but they're over here, they can't go over there. It's not safe. So that needs to change, you know. And I know that the government or whatever, there's some after that meeting that happened with I think Evelyn was there, and I can't remember who else was there right now. But Louis was there at the city hall for the public health. Like I know they're doing some things, they have some things started, but that all takes time too. And meanwhile, more babies are dying, so it needs to speed up. You know, less testing, more doing, more helping. Yeah.
So I could talk about this for hours just because I'm so involved in the advocacy part of what's going on with all levels of government. After my son was killed, I think about a year after, I was made aware that in 2008, the provincial government actually released a report after 2005's Year of the Gun called The Roots of Youth Violence. And outlined in that report was the very things that contributed to youth violence and youth picking up firearms. So to know that basically 13 years before my son was killed, they had recommendations on what to do, and none of them had been done. So hold on, I'm like 2005 to 2016, so 8 years. So when I found out about the report, I was livid, just because everything that they outlined in that report, since then, all they have done is made cuts and cuts and cuts and cuts and cuts to every single solitary recommendation, every one of them. There has been nonstop cuts in every area that is to support youth, to help them progress in life and to deter them from any type of gang lifestyle or any type of negative lifestyle, that and to put supports in place for them to excel in life. And like Brenda said, like when you really sit down and dissect everything, the system was built this way. Systemic racism is so engrossed in almost everything, the education system, the government's, all levels of government, the justice system, like every single solitary place that you turn, it was built this way. And they have all these things that they know that a lot of these kids that are engaging in these behaviors come from low income neighborhoods that are predominantly people of color or Aboriginal, and are the ones who are being affected by all these things, but they still choose to do the cuts against them. So like I said, like it's almost like I said in a interview recently, it's almost like the government officials don't even view the people in lower income communities as people. Okay, so they got shot, they got killed, they're living with trauma. We have little kids who are witnessing homicides. We have little kids who are getting caught in the crossfire. But hey, you know, I don't live there, so why should I care? But yet, when the shooting happened on the Danforth and it impacted upper income white people, all of a sudden the entire city was in an uproar and they got support like it was nobody's business. Like they within 3 days had donations of up to $1 million. But the Danzig shooting in 2013, that was in a low income neighborhood where a 14-year-old little girl and another 20, I think he was 21, youth worker, worst mass shooting in Toronto's history. And it was almost like nobody cared. So how do you rationalize that? How do you, like, how is one person's life more important than another person's life? Like, that doesn't make sense to me. Your income or your color of your skin is what makes you more value. Like, I don't understand that. And when I've been advocating for all levels of government to stand behind that Roots of Youth Violence report. Where's the money? Like, since my son's homicide, since John Tory came into office, it's been downhill and downhill and downhill and downhill and downhill. Now we have the Trudeau government talking about banning firearms, and he wants the municipalities to ban handguns. That's like the state's laws. And you can drive across any provincial border and bring, and any city's border and bring a gun in anywhere, any which way. There's no checking point. There's no way to determine that those firearms are crossing into provincial or municipal borders. That's insane. That makes absolutely no sense. And these kids are not using legal firearms. They're using guns that came from across the border, or they're using guns that were stolen. And nobody wants to hold the chief firearms officer and the RCMP accountable for their mishandling of the firearm laws. Our firearm laws are extremely regulated and strict. And the way I see it is, like, I've talked to a lot of firearm owners, and like they're not regularly, like their safes are not inspected, that type of stuff. So, and when things are stolen, yes, they report them stolen, but like, do you do background stuff? Like, what, there's a serious gap, especially with domestic homicides, in terms of if you have a domestic partner that you've made a complaint about, or they have been charged with any type of domestic violence in the courts, anything, restraining orders, anything, and an order is put that these people have to have their firearms revoked and confiscated. Sometimes the chief firearms office doesn't even, either they don't get the report or they don't act on it. But nobody wants to hold the RCMP accountable for their lack of follow through on one of the laws that should be, there should never be a loophole. There should never be a loophole. There should never be inaction there, because this is at the expense of people's lives. And I mean, there's a lot of people who think that gun bans are going to work. If we take the guns away, then there will be no suicides. There will be no homicides. You know what? If your root issue is not dealt with, it doesn't matter what mechanism you use, it's going to occur. And for homicides, it's probably going to end up being more brutal because people are, and it's going to be more personal because people are going to have to pick up something else to do whatever it is they have planned to do. And I mean, like you can't eliminate a problem by taking a tool away from it, because the tool is not useful unless you're holding it, unless you have that bad intent behind it. So if we're not addressing the roots of the issues, then nothing is going to change. It's just going to get progressively worse. And if you look about if you take a look now, like my community where I used to live, Connection, is being torn down. It's being torn down, and they're putting up 3 condo buildings, which have, I believe there is just over a quarter of those units are going to be subsidized units. How do you tear down 100 and something units and give only like 60? Where are all these people going to go? You haven't built any housing. You haven't repaired any of the subsidized housing. They're decrepit. They're not livable spaces. We have tons and tons of homeless people in encampments who can't find housing, and you're building condos. Why? How does that make sense? When housing is one of the root issues, poverty is the most significant issue in that Roots of Youth Violence report. Lack of housing, systemic racism, education to prison pipeline, the education system not being able to, they have overcrowded classrooms. They don't have child youth workers accessible in the schools. You are suspending and expelling children who have mountains of trauma that they've been dealing with, and you want to label them as problem children instead of dealing with their issues. Or you want to label them by getting them assessed as like ADHD or whatever type of developmental delay you can think you can come up with, because it has signs of what post-traumatic stress is presenting. So there's nothing. In the past four and a half years since I've been advocating, we did, like Brenda said, we went to the Toronto Public Health, and they unanimously deemed gun violence and community violence as a public health issue. But what's been done since then? They've created the Community Healing Project, which is good because it goes through the various communities across the city, and they do peer-led healing with the youth, and it's a very good program. I've actually sat on in it and taken part in one of them. It's a very good program. But what else? What else is really out there? The provincial government took away the compensation for victims of crime. And even if they did have it, anybody who was deemed as being part of their homicide, so say they were gang related or they got into a fist fight and ended up getting killed, their mother was not allowed to be compensated for their death. Why? Who are you to determine who's worthy or not? We still have the same pain. If a kid is in a gang, does that make their mother have less pain than the one who doesn't? We all love our children. The only reason the children are getting into these types of things is because sometimes some of these mothers or single parents, they have to work 2 and 3 jobs just to survive, just to pay housing costs. That doesn't even include the food. And then these kids see their mother struggling and want to make money to help their family. So what do? There's no opportunities. There's no jobs. What do we expect them to do? So I mean, a mother whose child is in a gang doesn't hurt any less than any mother whose child was not in a gang. So I think that was unreasonable, but nothing has been done in the past 4 years. Nothing. The gun ban is to appease the higher income people who really don't have an understanding of what gun violence entails, and they just don't want to get caught in the crossfire when there's a daytime shooting and they're out and about doing their thing, right? So, no, nothing has been done.
And those are some very full responses from all of you as well too. And I think it also like dives in like with a variety of the stuff that has been talked about, such as like even with gentrification and also within like the basic factors as well. So I think right now too, if you want to add some more, like even within the concept of gentrification, you know, as you said, with your townhouses being torn down, Evelyn, and like everything else too, do you guys feel that gentrification played a part in the rising rates of gun violence, deaths, and like poverty in like subsidized areas?
For me,
I think for all of you, if you want to like add, and I know that you spoke more about how it has affected you within the area that you grew up in, so yeah, or like the area that you were like in at the time. So
I would have to say that in terms of it being, it's pushing the violence almost to the outer areas, because right now Brampton has escalated violence as well, so does York Region. So as they gentrify the communities across the city, people either gravitate to the places where they at least have allies that they can still afford to live in the city, or they move out of the city. So now they move out of the city because of the cost out of the city. It's a little bit less expensive out of the city, and maybe a little bit more housing, but all it's doing is pushing it to the outer areas or further into the core. So
yeah, for me, I don't know if I have much to say on this topic. I don't really know what it's like to live in the inner cities, or really go through poverty. I can say I understand it. But I agree with Evelyn with regards to there's not enough channels, services available to aid these children. And even beyond aiding the children, sometimes parents need education as well. I mean, living in poverty, I can imagine it's depressing at times, knowing that you're struggling to make ends meet, to feed your children. Maybe counseling and stuff to uplift their spirits, help them find better jobs, education, schooling, what have you, to improve their lifestyle, then in turn improves the home, right? But if mom is struggling, kids are seeing that mom is miserable or agitated. I mean, it just trickles down, right? Kids see it. And then, as Evan was saying, like, what is the alternative, right? When you look at your parent who's struggling, and then it's like, they think, well, what hope do I have? I've lived here all my life, so what really is out there for me? Some kids are not exposed to a better life or what it is to live a better life, right? And sometimes even as simple as a field trip, you know, to go to a different neighborhood, to say, you know what, your life where you are is not who you have to be. This is how other people live, and this is how they accomplish it, or this is how they came to be able to live this type of lifestyle. Show them what could be, as opposed to them just being consumed by just their environment of where they are. Shifting them from one place to a next, it's not gonna help. I mean, I lived in Brampton for a short term, and what they did with Brampton is just, you just shifted the problem to a residential neighborhood. So you took people out of, yes, housings that's falling apart and put them into a nicer complex. But you haven't addressed the mentality that they have, right? If you haven't addressed it to show them you don't have to be this, then all they do is just do the same problems within their nicer neighborhood. And then what it does is infiltrate the rest of the neighborhood. So then other kids look at it and say, oh, hey, or whatever. Or kids that are not exposed to that lifestyle now become exposed to that lifestyle because the same people are there. So changing their housing, yes, is a nice thing to put them somewhere nicer, but if you don't change the thought process and give them tools of how to manage and how to come out of poverty, then to me, it's just like, it's a waste. It's just like a cover up. Well, let's make it look like we're doing something when really and truly, you're not really doing something. You're just shifting the problem somewhere else. And my short time in Brampton, like when I lived in Scarborough, it was more quiet. So I was out by the zoo side. So I mean, it was just quiet. So to say I experienced violence or what have you out there, no. But I ventured out to other neighborhoods because of where friends live. And it's like, yeah, the atmosphere is day and night, even the surroundings, people's mentality, right? And if you don't change the mentality or the thought process, then there's really not much you're going to accomplish, whether you ban guns or not. If somebody thinks that their only lifestyle is to be in poverty or is to engage in criminality, then banning guns, moving them to a nicer area isn't going to change that. And I think that's more social services are more needed. Even if you do want to move somebody, then provide services to them to show them this is why we're doing it. This is what we would like to achieve, right? There's many people that, yes, because of poverty, because of how they work, going back to school seems like an impossible task. If I go back, then who's going to pay my bills, right? If there was incentives of you register into a program, your expenses are paid, then at least after 2 years, you can say, well, you've produced person that can contribute to society. And with them getting a better job, maybe it'll make them look on their life that they're living as, oh, I can come out of this now because now you gave me the tools to elevate and educate myself. So a lot of masking is going on with what they want to do to help. For me, with my son, and as Brenda mentioned as well, systematic racism is unbelievable. Like I experienced it just briefly in my teenage years when, although I was doing the academic level, for some reason the guidance counselor felt to tell me, well, have you thought about going into a more administrative position? And it's like, how do you present that to me when my grades don't even show that, right? So it's like when you're held down, and that affected me because I actually dropped out of high school for a year. And I said to myself, no, I'm giving in to what they want, which is not for someone of color to elevate themselves. So I went back, but it took me a year of giving up to realize that I'm giving in. And for my son, school supports were not there. It's almost like I'm fighting a whole system by myself, which becomes virtually impossible. I had a child that was frustrated with the school system. no matter how much effort I put into to get him accommodated, to get certain things put in place, to have more communication with me. Let me help my child because I'm willing to advocate for my child. And it was an uphill battle that basically solved nothing. I got a child that came out more distraught, depressed, and frustrated with the whole system that nobody's willing to help. I was put myself in a situation where I was borderline ready to lose my job because complaints were always coming in. Denise is always on the phone. Denise is always rushing to leave. There's always an emergency because I was that parent that wanted to advocate for my child. So any issue, I gotta go. And I'm going down to the school to try and fight a separate issue. And sometimes if the educational system just work with parents that are willing to help their child, it would make life so much easier. Because I watched a child that was enthusiastic about education. He was good in school, to a child that just basically plummeted because everything that he tried, everything that I tried, it was just like a backlash. Well, that's not available. That's not available. Well, your child is not exhibiting these symptoms or he's not doing, and it's almost like the system is set for you to create a child that becomes a monster in order for them to get help. When there's parents that are trying to alleviate what the end result is, but they don't get that assistance. And that's essentially, for me, it's not about living in the inner city, but it's about fighting the school system to get support for just basic stuff. To me, it was basic, right? When you have a child that's disorganized, forgetful, simple thing as to the school. When I call in, tell me what's needed. Tell me what the assignment is. If I know what it is, then I can sit down with my child and it will get done. But if you leave it to him knowing that he lacks certain skills, then you're setting him up for failure. So when you don't give me that assistance, you feel lost and helpless as a parent to say, I'm doing all that I can, but short of quitting my job and sitting in the classroom with you to know everything that you're doing, it's like there is no outlet. So it's a collaborative approach from education aspect to societal aspect. They all got to come together and realize that you got to do A, B, and C in order to put the puzzle together. And I find that's what's lacking. Everything is just piecework. Well, we'll do this, but it's like, okay, you do that, but then what happens to everything else? And that's my take and my experience on the system on a whole, is that there's lack of support. And I mean, many parents, I know there's a lot of parents that haven't done what I've done with regards to advocating for my son at school, whether it's because of time, whether it's because they're not educated enough to know what they should be doing. If things were made available, if you see your child experiencing this, call this number, do this, read this, whatever. For me, I mean, I'm well versed in the system and I'm a first generation here. So I went to high school here. I went through the school system. So for me, I'm familiar with it. But for other people, I feel it for them who are immigrants to this country. You assume that what your child is getting is all that they're supposed to get. So if you don't have that firsthand knowledge or somebody guiding you through the system to say, you know what, you can ask for something more, you can fight for your child, you can say this, they just go along with everything, which is in turn another way of keeping our kids down when they could be productive citizens in society. But when you're fighting the whole system, I experienced burnout trying to fight for my son. It was overwhelming to the point I can't sleep, can't do anything, can't focus at work. It's like you're so frustrated. It's like you're fighting, and you're getting nothing back. So it takes all areas to fix the problem. You can probably never alleviate violence or criminality, but we can do a lot better than what's going on right now. Like when you see the problem stemming from not just inner city to suburban areas, it's like, do you not realize that this problem is evolving?
Yeah, totally. It's evolving. And I can kind of speak to what you were saying too, Denise, like around those opportunities, because I could see, like, I was, a single mom. I didn't have my parents. I didn't have any family here. I just moved here by myself with a friend that backstabbed me and whatever. And so it was just me, and had to just do it all. But like later on in life, when my son was grown, and he already he treated school like a revolving door. He hated school because similar reasons, right? They didn't understand, and you had to advocate to try and get things in his favor, so that he could actually do what's required and feel good about himself in that system, which never really happened. So he just left school, and that's that. But when I was on OW, or whatever it was called back then, family benefits, before Mike Harris axed us and sent me out of my apartment because I could no longer afford to live there. And I went to university. Well, because I went to university, my son saw that. He saw that I was going to university. He saw that I was enjoying myself, that I was learning things, right? And that was when he was like 9 or something. He was coming into the culture when I was learning about my own culture on my Indigenous side, and he was getting support there from the men just, really appreciating him and letting him know he belongs, and that he's such a good person, and all of that made a difference. And then going, forward, then the school system, really, that's where all the bullying started. And that was around when he was 7 too, and he was, young, just already getting bullied, and always being sort of the one that was caught when his friends would get him in to do a bunch of stuff, and he would be the one that was caught, and they would all go free. Just go. So he was always the scapegoat, and very sensitive, and all I could do is just try and be there for him. But what happened later on was, because I'm running my business all that time, but not really knowing what I was doing back then. And then when I started to really amp my business up, Quinn took notice. He was paying attention, not just to like what was happening for me, but he was literally listening to my phone conversations with my clients about how to grow their businesses. And he was like just excited. And he would look at what I had on the wall about, my next steps for the business and the plan for that month, and how I was going to get to 6 figures and things like that. And he couldn't believe it, and I almost couldn't either, but I knew I was doing it. And because of that, he was seeing that. When our youth see that around them, and we can't, not every mother can do that at every point in their lives. And I certainly couldn't for a long time, but when I was able to, I saw the difference. I saw it because one day he called me up and he said, "Mom, I want to go to university." He's like wanting to go to Trebas University for music production. And I was like shocked because he hated school so much. He dropped out. I'm like, whatever, you're a mature student, you can probably get in somehow. And he made it happen. He said, "Can you help me?" I'm like, "I'm 100%, whatever I can do." And then he got himself into that program and completed it. And commitment just was like, he wanted, that was when he moved back home. He was like, "I don't want to hang out with those people anymore I was hanging out with. I want to just be here and do my homework and make beats and do the music." And he was seeing, because he was around so much, to see now that my environment, my personal environment, and my financial success and all that was changing. He was able to see that and experience that for himself. And then he got motivated. He got inspired. He started really looking for a job. He started really like, how can I change my life and how can things get better? And he did that for himself. So like, that's what's possible. But we need to, there has to be those supports. I didn't have very many supports. I had to just bootstrap it and do it all by myself, with no funding. I was the funding, and not everyone can do that. So we need more resources out for those youth, and we need them, and for families to be able to provide that. Like anyway, yeah, it's just like, there's so much more that we need for this particular, specifically for youth of color, that just needs to happen. And youth who are troubled, like, they're troubled for a reason. So we need to get into those reasons and help them. Like, that's all it is. Just, why can't we just help them? So, but some people think that money is more important than helping. And you know what? Like, they go together. So anyway.
Yeah, no doubt. I know that we might be like running out of time, because I know like usually between like 8 o'clock, like later on, like most people will have some stuff to do, but I'll try my best to have like a part 2 next time. I just want to end off with like, like the last question that will be set for this. And then, like any final remarks as well. And then if you want to like say your handles, and then we can get on to certain questions. So, if you were to, so how do you want your son to be remembered as? And do you have any final remarks that you would like to say for the viewers? And where can people like follow you on social media, if any of you guys have any handles, by any chance, like social media handles?
Denise.
How I want my son remembered as, I think that's actually been set. His personality and his charm is what everybody remembers. Like, I was fortunate to know majority of my son's friends, so I was filled with stories. Like, after he passed, so many people called in person, people were talking, oh, I remember when Joel did this, or Auntie Denise, do you remember when we did this with Joel? So they're already filled with happy memories of him. And I'm glad I got to hear some of them. I've gotten a lot of pictures, a lot of videos, although you take your child everywhere and you drop them off, but you don't really know what they're doing inside per se. So like, I got videos of him dancing, acting the fool. So they created even more memories than what I had. Like, I have memories of my son from mother's son, but they gave me memories from his everyday life when mom is not there. So I know from things that they've said, gifts that they've given. I had one, his friends, she wrote me a letter. It's so weird because they got in trouble when they were in grade 8 and she apologized all these years later. Sorry for the stress that she caused. And it's like, to me, it was like no big deal. It was the school overreacting and whatever. But then in her letter, like, she told me all the things that my son did. Like, he helped her through her having suicidal thoughts or whatever. And it's like, well, your child is great, but then you hear other people saying it. It's like, oh my gosh, like, how could this child ever feel depressed or like go through these low moments? But then you think about the outside sources, as I said, with the educational system, it just shattered his everything, his psyche, his esteem, everything. But he'll be remembered as a child that, yeah, was loving, always cared about people, always put people first, always too trusting of who he thinks was his friend. And mom never knew. My intuition is always off, but my intuition was always correct when something comes up. So I know that's what he'll be remembered as an amazing, amazing child, cousin, friend, everything. He's touched a lot of people's life. Adults have come to me and I've said things that he has done. So.
And where would people would follow you on, like, on social media, if you want to, like, give your handles or anything like that?
Social media is Facebook is my actual name, so what you guys see, and social media is DEE _ JAM as in Mary S. So, and it's funny, I created that handle a long time ago, and I don't even think my son actually realized that it's my name and his name, his initials combined. Because when I told his friend when they all found me, I go, do you guys realize who Jams is? And they said, no. And it's like, don't you guys know Joel's name? And they said, oh my gosh, like we never actually put 2 and 2 together. And I was like, yeah, it's my name and his name combined. So that's how you can find me. On Instagram and Facebook is my actual name.
How my son Quinn will be remembered is for his great big smile, and I put that into one of the songs on the album that was dedicated to him that I made during the murder trial. It was called Grieve. And because everybody even at the murder trial, like every single one of the victim impact statements talked about his great big smile, and he's always had a great big smile. And also just his he reminds me of like my dad, because my dad, growing up, everybody in the whole place knew my dad. Didn't matter where you went, everybody had a smile for him, wanted to give him a big hug or give him, with my son, it was more like a fist bump or whatever. But always, like, if we're hanging out, it's like you can't go anywhere without somebody being there that knows my son and has a smile for him. So, yeah, I mean, his smiles and just the way that he was and also his intuition. He kind of knew what was about to happen, because we had some warning signs in a way. On a spiritual level, he came home one night and he said something. He said to my daughter's male friend at the time that was there just that night. He said, "Oh, you're the man of the house now." And that always struck me. And then it was only a couple weeks later that he was gone. And, rallying up all of his family and just wanting everyone to know each other and to be together, and just, that too, just, about coming together and just loving each other. Yeah. That's what I want people to remember, but that's I know what people remember about Quinn. And my socials are for Facebook, it's Medicine Song Woman, because that's my Indigenous name. That's Facebook is Medicine Song Woman. And for Twitter and Instagram, it's MSW Creations, as in Medicine Song Woman Creations. And you can find my music on all platforms.
So Kissinger will always be remembered as the big voice in the room, the one that the kids absolutely loved, because anytime he was around, he was like a big kid. So very vibrant, and he had a very boisterous personality, and the kids loved him. So we used to call him the baby whisperer, because anybody who had a crying baby, he'd be just like, give me the baby, give me the baby. And he'd have them sleeping or laughing within seconds. So he was one of the most amazing fathers that I have ever witnessed in my life. So, and he always had that type of paternal instinct in him. Just loving, and the one who always made you laugh. He didn't like sadness. He wanted everybody laughing around him. So he was like a big joker and completely accident prone. My gosh. stitches, broken bones, you name it. This kid, like, he ran into a tree once, turned around and ran into a tree and ended up with a coco on his head. So he was just very accident prone, but very, very funny. Very beautiful soul. And my Instagram is CZV416. Same with Twitter. And Facebook is Communities for Zero Violence.
All right. I think that ends off the interview part right there, but I will open it up for people to ask like any questions. I'll also check, within the group chats as well to see if people like asked any questions. But Lewis, do you have anything else that you would like to say right now? Or
yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you right now.
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to just thank the three mothers for their courage in expressing their hurt, their pain, and I think it's so important to listen to these voices, because no matter how many times I hear them, I still hurt and pain myself listening.
Yeah, we're
But
listening.
in terms of questions, I think it's important to understand that, and it's been mentioned a few times, is that there's so many pieces to this puzzle. You fix one piece, but there's another thing. But the strength and the success of our efforts going to be dependent on us working together and supporting each other. Because there's a lot of people out there that actually do care and want to make a difference, but they don't know how to do it. So this type of forum is important because people realize that the hurt, the pain, the trauma that these mothers are going through, right? We can do something about it. We don't have to leave them out there by themselves. So thanks for putting this together. And again, congratulations to the mothers for their courage and their determination to do something about it. And if I had a question, it would be like, how do you stay sane yourself with all of this burden that you carry? How do you keep yourself together? That would be my question.
Right.
Mine is Communities for Zero Violence. Denise?
I keep myself together. Sad to say that I'm still on medication, so I don't know what I would be like off of them. It's not a good feeling, knowing that this is the only way that I can push through without struggling with suicidal thoughts. So for now, that's what I need in order to sleep, in order to do anything. So
we got you. We're there for you, okay? We got you.
And you are definitely not alone.
So
we're there.
that's what keeps me going, but also to honor my son. I know he's never seen me fall. I've always kept my problems to myself, and I know that he would not like me to fall apart. He's always
we got
wanted
you, D-Gems. We got you, D-Gems. We got you. We got you.
That's what that's what keeps me going, that I cannot fail my son.
Thank you. Thank you.
I have a really
Brenda?
different answer. I don't keep myself together. I allow myself to fall apart. And it's really, really important for us to be able to do that, because if you're trying to keep it all together, you're gonna just end up exploding. So I that's why I made my album. That's why the album title is Picking Up the Pieces, because it's like all the pieces of me were on the ground. All my pieces of my life were on the ground. And it's like, well, I'm not ready to pick them up. Everything just fell apart. And what do I really want to pick up, and what do I want my life to become? Who am I now? There's life with Quinn, and then there's after Quinn. And so after Quinn, all I can do is have that passion. I saw what he was doing. I saw Quinn like rising up and being the person he wanted to be. I saw him living the life that he wanted to live. And that was through music and through his passion for it. And that's my life too. You know, I've been a musician for like 36 years now, professionally. And it's like, I know he would want me to continue doing that work, you know, and that's what my way to honor him is, you know, that album is dedicated to him. And I just put out a new single called Together We Can Stand Up, you know, about fighting the system in a good way. And just being, because I know he was also doing that in his own way and through his music. So that's how I don't keep myself together. You know, there are moments when I am together and there are moments when there's things falling apart, and it's all part of that grief and trauma. So I'm just here for myself, and I get a lot of support. I continue to have a therapist kind of on call when I need her, and you know, I have chronic pain from this, so I can hardly move some days without intense pain. Which I'm even feeling right now, like I'm just sitting here in a whole ton of pain. But I just, it's my passion to make a difference in the world. Through some part of it is this here, gun violence awareness, right? It's also, though, the bigger part for me is that healing work that I do through my music. So all of my songs are healing songs, and they all carry that medicine for grief and for love. Love of the ones that we've lost. And yeah, that's how I get through when I get to make a difference, when I see people feeling like they belong, feeling like they can make a difference too, feeling like their lives matter, like their kids' lives matter, you know. That's how I do that. That's how I do. Yeah.
All right. I'm just gonna stop